Today I want to talk about Jalen Redmond and the future of college football and all that's coming up after the bumper.
Don't be cornering me. Hold up. Time. You gotta help me with that corner shit.
What's up, kinfolk? It's RJ Young. I am not on a step mill. Consider hitting the like and subscribe button because I upload a video every single day. It's always college football related, sports related. We have a good time. Today, I want to talk about Jalen Redmond and what that means for Oklahoma's defensive tackle position because, well, he was picked up on arrest of DUI on Wednesday morning, and we're still waiting to see if charges will be filed. Might be public intox. We'll see how that goes, but Lincoln Riley might actually decide that this is worthy of a game or several game suspension, provided we get to play football this year. And for me, that kind of highlighted the defensive tackle transition that is going on right now with Calvin Thibodeau's defensive line. Now, add to this, Redmond only started 4 games last year, but led the team in sacks with 6.5 and had 11 tackles for loss and was everywhere in that game against Texas. And for him, a guy that got a late start to football, didn't really start playing until high school, and then battled blood clots and a medical issue that kept plaguing him throughout his career, finally got onto the field and looked ready to go, moved from defensive end to defensive tackle, and has flourished there. Add with that Big 12 Defensive Newcomer of the Year, LaRon Stokes, and what he has meant to Oklahoma. Also, the first homeschooled high school kid to get a scholarship to the University of Oklahoma, going by way of junior college to Northeastern Oklahoma, where he was a standout defensive end there. Now, on top of that, Ronnie Perkins is still scheduled to sit for 5 games due to suspension. He, Trajan Bridges, and Ramondre Stevenson all got pinched in what we think is a failed drug test that comes with missing 50% of the upcoming season's games. So 12 games is 6, 10 games be 5. They've already served 1, so maybe 4 games, right? But we'll see how that goes. Now, look at what is behind LaRon Stokes and Jalen Redmond. And you'll see a bunch of guys that are unproven, right? You'll see Jordan Kelly. Marcus Hicks and the Achilles thing, we'll see how that goes, but he's on the depth chart, and I expect him to be great once he gets healthy. He's that kind of a player. It's one of the reasons why I highlighted him. I also see other guys that just haven't actually proven that they could play at this level yet, like Josh Ellison and Perion Winfrey, though they were the number 1 and number 2 defensive tackles in junior college last year, both signed in the 2020 class. And you really need Zacchaeus McKinney and Marcus Stripling, among others, to step up, and that's what it is right now. Thibodeau has had just 1 first-team All-American in his time since returning to Oklahoma as a defensive line coach in 2016. That was Obo Okoronkwo. And he's seen all Big 12 players in Neville Gallimore and Ronnie Perkins, freshman All-American in Perkins. But now you're going to need him to coach his behind off. And if he doesn't get Redmond, that's just one more player he does not have to work with a defensive line that was getting better. Like, I was taking a look and playing with some numbers, and Oklahoma gave up 453 yards of offense in 2018. Last year, they gave up just over 356. It's not what you want, but it's a tremendous jump forward. It takes them from 114th in the country in 2018 to, like, top 60 in 2019. Now, add to that what Alex Grinch has been able to provide in not looking for a starting 11, but an all 22. He wants to go 22 deep across the board, and he wants to throw as many young players as he can into the fire as soon as he can and create depth. He wants to get young guys on the field when the score is still, in the balance, right? It's not just him trying to get those kids in there for garbage time when it doesn't really matter that much. But we've seen that you need depth to compete at the level that Oklahoma wants to compete at, which is the college football playoff level. You need great safeties. You need great linebackers. You need great defensive linemen. And if you have great defensive linemen, you can get away with a lot. They can really hide a lot of your weaknesses by penetrating and creating tackles for loss and demanding double teams. And that's what Calvin Thibodeau is going to be looking to do, beside Jamar Cain, who's coaching the outside linebackers. So expect those guys like John Michael Terry and David Ugwebu and Nick Benito to all have something to say about how good the pass rush is for Oklahoma in 2020. So I just thought that was worth pointing out. And then we're doing this thing now where we don't really know what college football is going to look like in the future, but we know it can't look like what it looked like in 2019. It's just not possible. The sport is unraveling in front of us, and I've been very, very clear about this, and I've been at the forefront of it, quite honestly, saying you can't sustain this model in this day and age when college football is generating tens of billions of dollars. And now we have folks that don't normally talk about college football talking about college football in the way in which many people are not going to enjoy, right? You've also seen really all the states that had, let me go at this a different way. The Pac-12 and the Big Ten cancel college football with the same data that the Big 12 and the SEC and the ACC have, and yet they're going to go forward, right? So what's the difference? You could say nothing has changed, and you could say the Big Ten and the Pac-12 finally did what we expect the Big 12, ACC, and Big Ten to do. Right now, we're still all waiting to see if there's college football to be played. But I found this piece in the Atlantic, because it's one of those places I read, along with the Washington Post, New York Times, LA Times, Wall Street Journal, Economist. I have a media diet that is robust, right? But this passage I thought was interesting from Amanda Mull in her piece this morning. The three remaining leagues presumably have the same information as the Big Ten and Pac-12, yet they have come to different conclusions, plunging the sport into an unprecedented upheaval. Evaluations are ongoing and will continue into the foreseeable future. That's Bob Berta, a spokesman for the Big 12. And that's what he said to her via email. He went on, if at any time our scientists and doctors conclude that our institutions cannot provide a safe and appropriate environment for our participants, we will change course, end quote. She goes on to say, if some conferences manage to play, they'll tap into television deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars, gaining an advantage in recruiting high school players and luring stars away from suspended leagues. The SEC and ACC did not respond to requests for comment from her. I'll add here, Amanda is a Georgia Bulldog, so she understands. She gets it. She knows what Southeastern Conference football is, and she knows what it means to the state of Georgia. I'd also add she's right. This is why Ohio State fans are right to be really pissed and also fearful, because you don't know what's going to happen with your team. Like I've said, this is perhaps the best Ohio State football team anybody's seen since 2014, certainly on par with the 2016 team and perhaps the 2015 team, but we're not going to be able to see it to its fullest. There's no way that we could, right? You can't ask those players that were making zero in terms of revenue for themselves to skip going to the NFL draft where they can make millions of dollars in revenue for themselves, as opposed to trading their ability to play football for what you call an education, right? I also think that this is interesting in that Ohio State is trying to use this to their advantage to try to secure star recruits like Emeka Egbuka, JT Tuimoloau, Travion Henderson, who's already committed, and others saying, hey, I'd like to see them play an 8-game spring season and a 10 or 12-game fall season. But that doesn't really work, right? Because you're asking players to play more football when we know the one thing that contributes to long-term debilitating issues for football players is playing more football. And while the argument that the kids are in high school and that they're spring chickens is one in which everybody seems to want to throw at the youth, you're also not actually taking care of them for their future. You're not thinking about what they're going to look like when they're 40 or 50 or 60. And for the guys that actually get to go play in the NFL and might play for a decade in the NFL alone, you're really ruining them. You're ruining their backs, you're ruining their knees, you're ruining their heads. I mean, we all know about what chronic traumatic encephalopathy can do to a brain, and we're still learning what more it can do to a brain. And though we have done as much as we can right now to put an end to helmet contact, it still happens, and guys still get knocked out of games. I love the sport. I also think that the sport needs to really get the players involved in a meaningful way. And the one time that we have seen a union try to organize at Northwestern, it was busted by Pat Fitzgerald, and then the National Labor Review Board decided not to recognize it, and that's all she wrote. You're going to need to come up with something like a players association, something like a union, and you're going to need an executive director that runs it that is only there for the players' interest to work with NCAA member schools. And now you can't create a bubble for these kids without really inciting further legal battles that would put it into the sham of amateurism. Because these teams, specifically in the Power 5, have decided that they're going to let the NCAA be their maid service, but in the NCAA being their maid service, they're prevented from making this bubble because they have to keep up the sham of student athletes, which is why we think that many Power 5 schools would be right to break away from the NCAA and say, we'll make our own rules because that's what we do anyway, right? And we have our individual conference championships. We select who makes the playoff. We could have an undefeated national champion like Central Florida who doesn't make it in, and on it goes. I don't see any reason for this except presidents, athletic directors, coaches, and members are greedy and don't want to share with players. All right, that's it for me. Deuces.